Folau saga has been making headlines for weeks, and as I've said, the free speech debate took another turn today when the GoFundMe page for Folau's legal fees was shut down. Joining me now for his take on this escalation in the fight for free speech in Australia and where to now for the Morrison government is Executive Director at the Institute for Public Affairs, John Roskam. John, terrific to have you on the show. Look, you have been, and your organisation, the IPA, you've been a lion for the issue of free speech. I was absolutely shocked today when that page was shut down by the American organisation GoFundMe. They are a commercial outfit, I have to tell people at home. They're not philanthropists. They make money from all of these fundraising pages, but it seems they'll decide what's free speech in this country and not Australians.
Hello, Peter. That's exactly right. And at one level, GoFundMe should have the right as a private organisation to make those decisions, except for a few things. One is arguably they've breached state and federal anti-discrimination law. Two, they're hypocrites. At one level, they are shutting down Israel Folau's fundraising page. But at another level, they allow a fundraising page for someone who is alleged to have committed a violent act against a politician. Now, GoFundMe talk about being inclusive and non-discriminatory, and we should be. But you have to be inclusive of views you sometimes disagree with. Now, the Israel Folau case and what he said is not the hill on which I would have necessarily planted the flag of freedom of speech or freedom of religion. I don't share his views, but I don't think he should have been sacked for saying them. You need to be able to disagree with those views. You need to be able to say, those are not my views. But what we have seen is on the verge of driving religion from the public square. And Peter, you put your finger on it. These are issues not just of Israel Folau and Rugby Australia. As you said, the Prime Minister has legislation on his desk that goes to exactly this question. What can schools do? What can churches do? What can GoFundMe do or similar like organisations?
So what concerns me about this issue, and it's had so many twists and turns, and look, I made it clear in my intro tonight, I, like you, am uncomfortable with what he said. I'm a Christian like Folau, but I suppose we read the Bible. He reads it from the front to back. I probably read it from the back to front. Start at the New Testament.
Like me.
But the issue, but the issue here, of course, is the first run at this issue was it was an employment contract, and that worried me very much because I think you don't want employers being able to stipulate in someone's employment agreement what they can believe in and what they can't. Then it moved to the broader domain of free speech. Again, it's worried me on many levels, not least obviously today, but also comments that were thrown around at his wife, the champion netballer, that she's not allowed to have her own view, that she's somehow almost as bad as Israel in terms of her hunting down of homosexuals because she won't go out there and condemn him and she should lose her contract. I mean, the idea that wives are chattels of their husbands is absolutely antiquated. But again, the feminists weren't out there sticking up for her. And I think this has been a case that most Australians have been very uncomfortable with it as they've seen it play out. How do you think Scott Morrison's going to tackle this next week? Because that report is now well overdue, John.
And Scott Morrison has to understand this is an issue of deep public concern. The way the Twitter mob have gone after not just Israel Folau but his wife, I think is really disturbing. The fact that something like $700,000 was already raised, the fact that something like 10,000 people donated to this, and this has a political perspective. We've just had a federal election where Labor have said people of faith were not regarded as being taken seriously by the Labor Party. And this is a live question. I think Netball Australia have probably been the most responsible in this debate, saying they don't endorse the position, but they understand what Maria Folau has done. And that's what we are losing in Australia. The idea of live and let live is being lost, and the people who preach being inclusive, being tolerant, are only supporting one side of the perspective. So what Scott Morrison has to understand is that every Australian is watching this. And it's not just going to be about what schools can teach or the sexuality of teachers in schools. This is a much broader question. From my perspective, I would argue that absolutely GoFundMe should have the right to say, we don't agree with those views, we won't accept that funding. But that will then entail, as has been discussed and is acknowledged, the unwinding of state and federal anti-discrimination law. Now, that's going to be very difficult. And at the moment, I don't know whether the government has a way through this. And exactly as you've said, through the election campaign and up to now, the Prime Minister has avoided the issue. I don't think he can avoid it for much longer.
Are we naive, John, to think that free speech is really free in this country? Are we naive to think that this is an isolated case? Is this just the most public case, the most long-running case that's drawn these issues to our attention? Is this happening right around the country, in workplaces and in community groups, you know, well and truly beyond the more high-profile Israel Folau's?
No, I don't think we are naive, Peter. Australians care deeply about these issues, and what is interesting about the Israel Folau case, for example, is the situation of Australians saying, look, I don't share those views, but he needs to be able to say them, and then I need to be able to disagree with them. What is really worrying is the self-censorship that goes on, and it's not a coincidence that at the same time as we have this going on, we have a debate about what's happening at universities as well. We have a debate about what the media can say. We have a debate during the election campaign of the Greens suggesting that people they disagree with should be censored. Now, as you and I have spoken about, the coalition government has by and large liked to stick to economics. And exactly as you said in your introduction, deficits, taxes, these are central key issues. But more fundamentally than that is culture. And at one level, the government can take its hands away from the cultural debate, but they can't because this is affected by legislation. Now, Australians freely and voluntarily gave to Israel Folau's appeal. That's different when we as taxpayers fund the Human Rights Commission to, I would argue, persecute students at QUT for simply saying Australians shouldn't be segregated. None of these issues can be disentangled, but I'm not naive. I'm positive about this because the deep interest of Australians in these issues reveals how core they are to what it is to be Australian.
John Roskam, Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Peter.